Rivalries. They're a driving force in all sports. They provide one of the highest forms of entertainment, not to mention that it's one of the most fun parts of supporting a team. Throughout the years, many of them have formed in the Overwatch League. Whether the team you support is historically good, bad, or average, every single team has one. Today I present to you the biggest rival in Overwatch League history for every single team. Starting it all off is the Atlanta Reign. Since joining the league as one of the 8 expansion franchises back in 2019, Atlanta has formed a heated rivalry with many rosters, and nobody is safe from being called a feeder. Their upsets against New York and San Francisco make those two very tempting, but there's one team that stands head and shoulders above the rest. It's gotta be the Philadelphia Fusion. While some may argue they can't be rivals since Atlanta can't even win a game against them, it's important to remember that not every rivalry you see consists of teams trading wins with each other. There are some instances where you see heated rivalries that are fairly one-sided when strictly looking at the results. Look at the Chicago Bulls and New York Knicks in the 1990s. Michael Jordan eliminated those Knicks teams in the playoffs many different times, but do people still consider this to be one of the biggest rivalries in 90s basketball? Yep, they sure do. And the reason is simple. The games were always close, and they had this certain level of tension and intensity to them. The same can be argued for Philly versus Atlanta. Besides their most recent matchup in the 2020 season, every other game has been a complete roller coaster ride. There are some classic moments. You've got DeFran styling on Philly with Torbjorn, Dogman screaming at Carpe on stage, and not to mention a ton of close heart-stopping matches. If my memory serves me right, then Philly and Atlanta have played each other on 5 different occasions. 3 of those times went the distance too, but no matter how hard the Reign pushed them, the Fusion always seemed to persevere and get the better of them. That in itself makes Philly such a great rival for them. They are their end goal. The Reign have been striving to improve and finally take Philly down. They serve as this type of motivation. They're the biggest obstacle they have yet to overcome. They've dealt with the Shock and even the NYXL, but they still need to get over the hump known as the Fusion in order to truly feel like they've made it. The Boston Uprising. Although they've kind of been a joke over these last couple of years, the Uprising do have those certain teams that they are definitely rivals with. For one, you could go the route of the classic New York versus Boston rivalry. After all, Boston were one of the very few teams to beat the NYXL more than once in Season 1. The storyline of the Uprising potentially being the new #1 team made that dynamic between these two very heated. You could also argue they've had a good rivalry with teams like Philly and London as they played some really good games with them in the past. In the end though, the team I ultimately decided to go with as Boston's biggest rival is the Houston Outlaws. I know we don't always picture these two as enemies, but the fact of the matter is that these two have gone 5+ maps in a series on 4 different occasions. In many of those games, they were instant classics you could argue. In Stage 1 of 2018, they duked it out in an epic battle to decide who would claim the final stage playoff spot. I personally have very fond memories of that one, and who could forget about El Clasico, otherwise known as the Toilet Bowl. While it may be one of the biggest clown fiestas we've ever laid eyes on, I think it's safe to say that everybody had a pretty good time and was very entertained. The game itself served as one massive meme where the loser would ultimately be crowned as the number 20 team at that point in time. It'll go down in infamy and it will surely never be forgotten. The Chengdu Hunters. Okay, these guys are, well, weird. It doesn't really feel like they have a specific enemy in most scenarios, as they tend to just surprise us here and there with upsets. But there is one team where I feel you could make an exception. My biggest rival of the Chengdu Hunters is the Guangzhou Charge. These two have played some pretty epic matches in the past. It goes all the way back to the very first night of Season 2, where a Hunters team that not many people had faith in were able to clutch out a win in 5 maps. However, that match came when Nero was still under the age of 18. Once he became a weapon at Guangzhou's disposal full-time, things would play out a lot differently when he outputted 2 dominant performances in a row on Hangzhou and Pharah respectively. The one on Pharah came in a playoff scenario as well, which only makes the bad blood between these two grow even more. Nero's strong performances have even continued into Season 3, giving all Chengdu fans more reason to hate this guy for being the bane of their existence. As it currently stands, the Charge lead in the win department as they've won 4 of the 6 meetings between them and Chengdu. 2 of those include 5-map thrillers here in Season 3. The Charge seem to be that team that the Hunters always play close, but usually can't beat them for some reason, which in my opinion makes them such a great rival, as Guangzhou stand as this type of obstacle that they never seem to be able to get away from. The Dallas Fuel. There's a small handful of teams that stand out as longtime enemies for this team ran by Envious. It's no secret that the Dallas fanbase has beef with a few specific teams in the league, but the biggest one for sure, at least in my opinion, has to be the Houston Outlaws. This is a no-brainer, right? It's a rivalry that goes far beyond esports. The Battle of Texas is a sacred rivalry across all sports. I've seen Houston and Dallas fans go at each other so many times. Texas natives tend to be proud of their sports team, so it goes without saying that things quickly get intense when a fan of the opposing Texas team tries to argue their team is better. It's not just the fans who take great pride in this, though. Throughout the years, many of the players have heavily invested into this rivalry. Guys like Jake, XQC, Muma, AKM, and even Raucus have taken it very seriously in past years. Between all of their efforts plus XQC's hatred for the Houston players, this has turned into a league favorite matchup. Anyone else remember watching the Battle of Texas at the Dallas homestand? I know I certainly do. The game itself wasn't amazing, but the raw energy and physical environment was out of this world. The roaring crowd in the Dallas home arena is one of the best I've ever heard in Overwatch League history. All the Dallas and Houston fans really elevated the overall energy and hype level of that matchup. Another thing to mention is that this series is nearly all evened up. In the 5 official league meetings they've had since the beginning of 2018, the Outlaws currently have the slight edge sitting at 3-2. But it's worth mentioning that Dallas has taken the previous 2, meaning that Houston hasn't beaten them since the inaugural season. Hopefully we can see these two meet up again at some point so we can become one step closer to settling the dispute on which team is worthy of being number 1 in Texas. Next up is the Florida Mayhem, who are easily one of the hardest teams on this list. This is the first season they've actually been relatively competitive, so picking a rival based on every year is very difficult. I had to look very carefully at their schedule over the years to make a decision. After researching and seriously thinking about it, I came to the conclusion that their biggest rival is the Washington Justice. Every time they've met, it's felt meaningful in some sort of way. When they played each other at the end of Stage 1 last year, the end result played a decisive factor in revealing who was the number 20 team in the league during that time. In a way, it was also quite memorable, but for all the bad reasons. Easily the two sloppiest teams in Standard GOATs going head to head. It goes without saying that this type of meetup was pretty much guaranteed to yield some pretty interesting results. This game was so bad that people actually remember it. That's impressive. That's not what is supposed to happen when a game sucks. But this one was so bad that it just won't stop sticking with you. With how hard each of them were throwing, it felt like the battle of who wants to lose more. But it's not just this meeting that makes their rivalry special. Their second battle at the end of Season 2 happened to go to 5 maps as well. But this time the storyline was completely changed. Now it was the battle of redemption tours. Player and Corey were able to fully unleash their power on heroes they were truly comfortable playing, while ultimately giving us the answer as to which Superstar Hits game player was better at the time. What built onto the rivalry even more is that the Justice pulled off the reverse sweep, which surely made a lot of Florida fans feel very frustrated since the same team once again made a fool out of them. Now looking at Season 3, their game this year wasn't anything special if you don't include that Reinhardt play made by Yaki, but to me it signals that the intensity could be picking back up in the future now that the Justice have made major improvements to their roster. This could make for an even better rivalry now that the two of them are fully Korean teams on the rise. The Guangzhou Charge. Okay, I know this may sound a little unoriginal and lazy, but my biggest rival for the Charge is the Chengdu Hunters. It goes both ways if you ask me. While the Charge may have been the ones to find more success in the overall series, Chengdu has still served as a great challenge to them just as they do for the Hunters. This Chengdu team has tested them in multiple instances, which is evident by how many map 5s they've gone to with them. Not to mention there's also the regional rivalry they share as two teams located in China. Moving on to the Hangzhou Spark, believe it or not, I found myself being pretty undecisive with this one. There were two teams in particular that really stood out to me as being rivals of the Hangzhou Spark. The Valiant and the Charge are the two teams I feel you can make a very strong case for. The Valiant are in consideration simply because of the amazing games they played with them last year. Every time they faced off, it went to map 5. Every time. And every single one of those times, the games were absolutely amazing. But because the Valiant are a different team now, and I'm unsure whether the magic is still there or not, I decided to select the Guangzhou Charge as the Spark's biggest rival. Again, think from a regional standpoint here. These two are quite familiar with each other being from the same division and all. They are both stationed in different parts of China, so it gives the teams and fans incentive to just hate each other by default and want to prove they are the superior team in China. And what I love about these two historically is that neither one seems to be able to get the edge over the other. Look at the results from their match history. There hasn't been a single instance where one of them has taken consecutive matches. They feel like true divisional rivals. The Houston Outlaws. It was tempting for me to pick the Fusion or Spitfire because they formed some incredible memories with them, but all of that really came in Season 1. There's no history to remember from Season 2 and onward. As a default option, I'm going with the Dallas Fuel for basically the exact same reason as I said as to why Houston are the Dallas rivals. They both play in Texas, and things get heated for all sorts of different reasons. The London Spitfire. So these guys are pretty weird. With their new team, they haven't quite formed any big-time rivals yet, so we kind of have to look more towards seasons 1 and 2. I know it's kind of lame to do this, but I found myself being really indecisive and I couldn't just pick one team. I have a tie between the Fusion and Gladiators as I feel they're pretty equal. The Fusion are part of this team's highest highs and lowest lows. When the Fusion upset them in the Stage 2 playoffs back in the day, that was the loss that started a sharp decline for a London team that was practically limping their way into the end of season playoffs. Not to mention that along the way, Philly beat them a couple more times after that initial playoff loss. Soon after though, when the Spitfire got hot, the Fusion were the final hurdle they had to climb over to become champions, and they did so. All while Profit destroyed the hopes and dreams of Philly fans worldwide in what probably still gives them nightmares to this day. And while it wasn't as intense in Season 2, the two of them still showed they are rivals by trading wins with each other in their 2 meetings, one of which includes the Fusion getting revenge in a season-opening Grand Finals rematch. As for why I can make an equal case for the Gladiators, I have one word for you: fissure. London trading him over to there proved to be a huge mistake for a while, as he and the Gladiators haunted them 3 stages in a row, one of which includes reverse sweep if I remember. No matter how hard London tried, they could not get past their former teammate. He made their lives miserable by constantly reminding them that none of this would be happening right now in the first place if they kept him on the team. We can't forget about their playoff series later down the line, now can we? It allowed for the Great Bamboozle to happen, which is one of the greatest plays in league history. You also have to remember that the Gladiators proved to be London's greatest obstacle during that playoff run. Getting rolled in Game 1 served as a major wake-up call. At that point in time, they seemed like they were dead in the water. But instead of lying down and quitting, they used the greatest adversity they had faced all season as an opportunity to break their limits and achieve greatness. The storylines and overall effect Los Angeles had on London over the entirety of Season 1 is unforgettable, which is why I felt it was necessary to include them as the co-greatest rival in Spitfire history. The Los Angeles Gladiators. I mean, there's really only one logical choice here. I'd be a fool if I picked anybody other than the Valiant. The Battle for LA is one of the most popular rivalries we have, if not the most popular. Like with the Battle for Texas, the energy of those games hits different when you have fans around. Who could ever forget about those matches at the Blizzard Arena where all the Valiant fans would sit on one side and all the Gladiators would be on the other? And don't even get me started on the Wings Out versus Shields Up shouting matches. This rivalry can only be matched by a select few. These two hate each other in every way. The fans butt heads with each other, the players talk trash in pregame interviews, and generally speaking, it's one of those my team is the best one in the city type of deals. And I haven't even began to get into the matches themselves. Right from the first time they ever played, you knew this would be a matchup to always look forward to. We've had everything you can imagine. Reverse sweeps, map 5s, epic playoff meetings, and if you're the Gladiators, a chance to crush the playoff hopes of your arch nemesis. That's what I love about these two. It's not just a we're both from the same city thing. They've genuinely been part of some very memorable moments in league history. LA versus LA is a staple rivalry that we cannot live without. The Los Angeles Valiant. With the way I was just talking about them, it goes without saying that their rivals also happen to be the opposing team from LA. There's no need to go into detail as I'd be repeating the exact same things, so I'll leave it at that and move on to the next team. And that team is the New York Excelsior. Throughout the years, they've made a ton of enemies. When you've been one of the toughest teams in the league for 3 years consecutively, you are bound to have a big target on your back. So many teams have wanted to prove they are better, but there's one team that absolutely stands out from the rest of the pack. The NYXL's biggest rival for me is the Philadelphia Fusion. They are the one team that never seems to stop pestering them. They keep getting in the way. Think about it. It all started in Stage 1 of 2018 when the Fusion denied them of an undefeated stage. Then in the Stage 2 playoffs, the Fusion pushed them to the brink. No matter how many times they got beaten down, the Fusion would never go away. We saw this play out in Season 2 and then recently in their Season 3 rematch. And then we saw the same thing happen in their 2018 playoff series when the Fusion completely embarrassed them thanks to a better understanding of the meta. The NYXL probably hate Philly so much for that, as they were the ones that kind of started the NYXL are chokers viewpoint that still haunts them to this day. The Paris Eternal. After the events that have transpired this year, it practically feels mandatory to say it's the Philadelphia Fusion. So far, this has without a doubt been the best rivalry we've had in 2020. 3 meetings and 3 map 5s. You couldn't make a series any closer if you tried. And I mean, come on. That final round on Oasis is one of the single best rounds of pro Overwatch we have ever laid eyes on. It's one of those rare occasions where it seriously gets your blood pumping even if you don't support either of the rosters. 2 of the top teams in the league are constantly on each other's backs trying to prove they are truly worthy of being the #1 team in the American region. And how about some of the player dynamics you get? You have the veteran god tier Hitsgang Carpe versus the rookie prodigy Exi, a Sato Nosmite and Benbest redemption collision course, and a Reddit Lucio battle for the ages. These guys have only really been considered rivals for a year now, but this Fusion team always pushes Paris to improve. It's a rivalry for the ages, and it'll surely only get better when Paris have both Exi and Sparkle available. The Philadelphia Fusion. This team has limitless options. They are the kings of playing everybody close. I was very tempted to go with Paris or maybe London, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I think it has to be the NYXL. Like in New York's case, this rivalry has truly tested Philly over the years, between having to overcome them to prove they're one of the best, and dealing with the hardships of multiple crushing defeats. New York has allowed for the Fusion to grow so much as a team, and as a result, they have consistently gotten to greater heights because of them. Moving on to the San Francisco Shock now. Originally, I almost went with the Gladiators because of how many times they've beat each other up in the past, plus them being both from California and all, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the Vancouver Titans were the right pick. I know it may sound silly because now the Titans are shells of their former selves and wouldn't even be worth San Francisco's time, but you have to remember how often Vancouver got in their way last year. Every step of the way, the Titans were a hurdle to get over. At first, they were the ones that kept them from greatness and from being considered the best GOATS teams in the world. It took the Shock many months of grinding to finally get past this colossal enemy that were stopping them from finally giving their fans some sort of championship after an entire season of tanking. Then, the Titans were standing in their way of having a second undefeated stage in a map 5. And finally, they were the last mountain to climb in their epic grand finals run. The point I'm trying to make here is that the Titans have literally been around anytime the Shock were trying to find some success. The Seoul Dynasty. When I think of a team that has truly always been in Seoul's way, it's the NYXL. Coming into the inaugural season, the Dynasty were considered to be the favorites to win it all, but shortly after, as we'd all find out, New York had different ideas in mind. Right from stage 1, they dethroned the Dynasty as the championship favorites and never looked back. As a side note though, their stage 1 and 2 meetings were classics. To this day, they are still some of my favorite games in league history. The closeness of the games themselves, plus the intensity of both teams wanting to show they are better was something else. And let's not forget about all the fun individual matchups. The old #1 flex support versus the new best flex support, Fleta versus Libero, and even Miro versus Mono. That was such a blast to watch back in the day. But anyway, after those 2 instant classics, Seoul found themselves never even coming close to beating their Korean enemies for a while. For quite some time, people questioned if the Dynasty could ever defeat their kryptonite. How could they ever even be called a Dynasty to begin with if they could never beat the NYXL? But thankfully for the Dynasty fanbase, 4 attempts later, and they finally pulled off the magic. And it came in spectacular fashion nonetheless. That fateful stage playoff game is simply unforgettable. In what was one of the biggest playoff upsets in league history, the Seoul Dynasty overcame their fears in commanding fashion. Although it was kind of one-sided, there were great memories littered all over the place. For one, we have Michelle's Sombra performance, which was without a doubt one of the most dominant performances we've seen on that hero before. It's not often where you see Meko or Jonek struggle that much. And speaking of struggles, who could ever forget about the Nene grab? It's one of the biggest memes to ever come from the league. It was also one of the most embarrassing moments in Excelsior history to add on to that. The Dynasty and NYXL rivalry is one of the best ever. I don't care how one-sided the final results are. The Shanghai Dragons. There were a few tempting options when looking at Shanghai's history, but in the end, I couldn't resist going with the Fusion. I know they haven't played as many amazing games as other rivalries on here, but the overall story they have this year in particular makes them feel like true undisputed enemies. The big talk in Season 3 has been, who's better? The Dragons or Fusion? In my opinion, you could make a strong case for either of them, and that's the thing. That's gotta make the players and fans feel a little frustrated. They are both up for consideration as the #1 team in the league, but obviously one team is still standing in their way, and I'm sure this has generated some tension between the two. Another thing to think about is the whole Carpe Diem thing. 2 lifelong friends playing the same position who are constantly trying to one-up each other as a friendly competition of sorts. We already saw Diem outduel Carpe a few different times last year, and I think I can speak for just about everybody when I say that we'd love to see a rematch of that and just a battle between these 2 juggernauts in general. Okay, so that's every OG Season 1 team. Now for the 3 remaining expansion franchises. Starting with the Toronto Defiant, I can't even deny that I had some trouble with these guys. They haven't exactly been what you'd call successful. There's no one in particular that they seriously have had a heated relationship with, so I'm just going to say their biggest rivals are the Houston Outlaws. I picked them for the simple fact that they have both reverse swept each other now. Toronto did it to Houston during opening week of Season 2, and Houston returned the favor a few weeks back. I'm sorry if that sounds like a lackluster explanation, but the Defiant haven't really built up intensity with anybody in my eyes. It was either the Outlaws or the Vancouver Titans for the whole who is better in Canada thing. Speaking of the Vancouver Titans, they're up next. Since they recently started over, their new team hasn't had enough time to be fully integrated into the league, so obviously we're going to be strictly looking at Season 2 and the few games their old roster was part of in 2020. And I mean, there's only one logical selection here, right? Would it really be right if I didn't say it's the Shock? If it weren't for them, they'd in all likelihood be the winners of Season 2, as well as 2-time stage champions. I should probably bring up that the Shock also put an end to their dominant undefeated streak in the league. The Shock are the team that stopped them from achieving their goal of world domination, and I'm sure there's some other accolades they could have achieved too. Maybe Twilight would have won MVP, or perhaps a few more of their guys could have been role stars. Like with Lunatic High and GC Busan before them, the Shock are yet another team that robbed Runaway of true greatness. Consider looking at it from the point of view that the Shock also served as the team that made Vancouver strive for improvement. They were always the team that was either right behind them or just out of their reach, and I'm sure it made the players with a strong work ethic try even harder to make sure they could always stay in front of their nemesis. And last, but certainly not least, is the Washington Justice. They are another one of those teams where there's not many good options available. So for the sake of getting this long video over with, I'm going to say the Mayhem and call it a day. And my reasoning is basically the same as to why the Justice are Florida's arch rivals. They've constantly battled each other across all these intricate storylines, and it has produced some very fun games between divisional foes. There's not much to say other than that though, so we're done here pretty much. With that said, that is every team's biggest rival in Overwatch League history. What does your list of the biggest rivals for each team look like? Show us down in the comment section. And if you enjoyed this video, you should definitely hit that like button and subscribe as it helps the channel out a ton. You could also further support me by following my Twitter, joining the community Discord, and becoming a channel member. And that pretty much does it, guys. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate it a ton. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.